It is getting to that time of the year where the Sheffield Wildcards are announced. We're going to find out who's completing the roster for the most hyped event in powerlifting right now. In this video, I'm going to go through who I think deserves and who I think will get the Sheffield Wildcards for the men and the women, based on how they've been selecting it, and specifically how they selected it for last year. So first, I'm going to go through who has the Sheffield spots. Of course, there's 12 spots for the men and 12 for the women, 10 of which have already been taken. There are 2 wildcard spots up for grabs each. So the 10 athletes that are there for the men, you have Ivan Campagno Diaz, of course, world champion in the 59s, Shell, who won the 66s, Perk in the 74s, Joe B, 83s, Emil Krastev, 93s, Anthony McDonald, 105s, Etienne with the upset win that I predicted, by the way, in the 120s, and Jesus didn't total 95% off the world record, so he didn't get one. So instead, Keenan Lee got one as the person who had the biggest percentage of the world record by a non-world champion this year. And Emil Norling was the next one, who also very nearly broke the world record at Worlds this year. And then the 10th athlete was Durans Kengamu. So those are the 10 confirmed men who will be at Sheffield. And like I said, there's 2 wildcard spots up for grabs. Then with the women, pretty much every single world champion from every weight class made it in. So you had Heather Connor, Evie Corrigan, Sarah Rinaldi, Alba Borstrom, Agatha Shitko, Claire Natongatea, Amanda Lawrence, and Brittany Schlater. So all the 8 world champions, all of them totaled 95% or more off the world record. And then Chiara Bernardi in the 63s and Tiffany Chapone in the 47s got the other 2 spots as the most percentage of the world record lifted by non-world champion lifters at Worlds this year. Okay, cool. So those are the 20 confirmed athletes for Sheffield 2026. So there are 2 wildcard spots up for grabs. Now, how did they select the Sheffield wildcard spots for this year? Well, Emil Krastev got the first one for the men, and he got it courtesy of his second place performance at 2024 Worlds, where he totaled 895, which at the time matched the IPF world record. So he totaled 895, 100% of the world record, even though he finished second and Gustav ended up winning. He ended up getting the first wildcard spot. And then Shell Backlund got the second wildcard spot, who also came second at Worlds in 2024, totaling 812.5, which at the time, going in, the world record was 815 held by Shell. Of course, that was where Perk first hit the IPF stage and I think took it to 836 on that day. But yeah, basically the takeaways from this is they essentially picked the male wildcards from 2024 Worlds, right? So even though the wildcards could have gone to any other athlete or any other athlete who had standout international performances at other meets, of which there were a few last year, they still just went by whoever had the biggest percentage of the world record from Worlds, which is kind of weird because that's what the main criteria is. You would think wildcards, they look at other stuff. But yeah, I'm going to be using that takeaway when I do my predictions later on. Then for the women, Leah Bavois got the first wildcard spot. And this was a weird one because I'm pretty sure when they announced this, the reason they gave, or as her performance that clinched this wildcard, was when she totaled 97.5% of the world record, which she did at 2024 Sheffield, where she came in second. And I didn't think that they took the previous Sheffield into account. I thought it was performances of that season, if you will. So i.e. from Worlds onwards. Anyway, I don't know. That's the reason they gave. Leah Bavois got the wildcard. And the other women's wildcard was Kalina Tongatea, who again finished second at Worlds. And due to that total, she got given the wildcard for 2025 Sheffield. Okay, cool. So that's what happened last year. Which means that we should be looking at who totaled the most percentage of the world record at Worlds who has not already been invited to next year's Sheffield. So that's what I'm looking at next right here. So if you look at the men, this is the ranking of the men at 2025 Worlds who totaled the highest percentage of the world record but have not already been invited to Sheffield. So you have Gustav and Cayco in 1 and 2 respectively in the 93s, finishing second and third behind Emil Krastev. Nonso and Dev in the 120s, finishing second and third in the 120s. Ade, who finished in third in the 83s, noting that both Joey B and Durans Abafim already invited. Then Regan, who was 4th place in the 105s, because the top 3, Keenan, Emil Norling, and Anthony McNaughton, all got invited. The reason why I have almost 97.82% beside Regan's name there is because if you recall at Worlds this year, he totaled 910 on his second deadlift. On his third pull, he loaded 10 kilos more. He got it, and I think he just beat the down command. He literally lifted it, and he got 3 red lights for beating the down command because he lowered it too soon. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And that would have given him a 920 total, which at the time we thought wasn't significant because he wouldn't have pulled into bronze anyway. So, okay, he totaled 910 instead of 920. He's still finishing 4th place. No big deal. Well, it could potentially be a big deal because if you had given Regan 920, that equated to 97.82% of the world record at the time, which, remember, these are the percentage of the world records as they stood going into Worlds, not coming out of Worlds, i.e. Regan's 910 or 920, let's say, would have been 97.82% of 940.5, which was the world record going in, not 975.5, which was the world record Anthony Norton set at Worlds, right? But yeah, if Regan would have got that final pull, he would have pretty much been on top of this list as the highest world record percentage by someone not already invited. So yeah, we thought it wouldn't have mattered with that final deadlift. Oh well, not so painful. If you go by this, it potentially could have mattered because it could have been the thing that sealed his wildcard spot, right? Although I doubt they're going to take a 4th 105. So really, it probably wouldn't have mattered anyway. Then Joseph McDonald, who I'll be looking at later on this list as well, courtesy of his Junior Worlds performance, but he's also on this list. Mo Suleiman as well in the 120s, and then Enna in the 83s is also there. So those are the 9 men who totaled above 95% of the world record, but have not already been invited to Sheffield. And if we're looking at the previous year and going by the precedent of Emil Krastev and Shell Backlund being invited, there's a good to fair chance that this list is going to decide who they take or who the wildcard spots are given to. So Gustav and Cayco being close to the top of that list, and Nonso as well, you know, they're kind of up there. Then if we look at the women, there were 8 women who totaled 95% or more, but were not already invited to Sheffield. Megan Lee Smith, who again I'll be looking at later with her World Games performance. Meg Scanlon, Sonita Muluh, Jad Jacob, Joy Namani, Crane Wolford, Laura Matalan, and Vicky Kijul-Naiporn. Those are the 8 women. Now remember last year with the Sheffield Wildcards, there was a bit of controversy, especially with the men there, because you had other performances from top international meets. Like, for example, Gavin Aiden at NAPFs broke the IPF world record, totaling 901, right? And despite that happening, they still just took Emil Krastev and Shell via their world's performances, even though they waited till after all the other internationals. And even though someone did in fact break a world record at an international, they still didn't take him. Now, did that have to do with the fact that Gavin Aiden received the wildcard for both of the first 2 Sheffields and they didn't want to give it to him for the 3rd straight year, even though, funnily enough, it was the year he would have been most deserving because he didn't break the world record the other previous years. But my point is, we've seen quite a few international meets post-Worlds. We're not going to be seeing any more until they announce Sheffield, which is why I'm dropping this video now. But we've seen World Games, we've seen Junior Worlds, NAPFs, and yes, they could be taking lifters from those performances, but based on last year, they may not necessarily do that. There's nothing stopping them from just looking at Worlds like they did last year. And another funny note before I move on, Shell and Emil Krastev actually finished in gold and silver. They've literally placed 1 and 2 at Sheffield, and they were the 2 wildcard spots. So yeah, funny how that works out. Carlin as well, who got a wildcard, finished in 2nd. So the wildcards did pretty damn well last year. But okay, so here are the other internationals I was talking about, and the 9 male lifters who totaled 95% or higher, who haven't already been invited to Sheffield, at the internationals since Worlds. And what I mean by that is we had Asian Championships, we had NAPFs, we had World Games, and finally Junior Worlds. So we had those 4 international events where IPF world records could have been set, and opportunities for other lifters to, you know, put up big numbers on the international stage to try and secure a wildcard spot. So of course, the only lifter who managed to break an IPF world record at any of those 4 competitions on the men's side was Russel Orhii, who famously totaled the 918 after diverting from the wrong continent entirely. But yeah, he broke the world record and he's on top of that list. Then Joseph McDonald, who won Junior Worlds just recently, is 2nd on the list with 965. Joshua Ngoka, who placed second at Junior Worlds against Joseph McDonald in the 120s, is also there. Taylor Atwood, even though he didn't break the world record at NAPFs, alongside Russ, he still totaled a pretty large percentage of the world record. Elliot Sykes from Junior Worlds this year as well with his 815. Then Anatoly in the 105s with his World Games performance. 937.5 would have been, if he had done that at Worlds, he would have got a Sheffield spot because Emil Norling got it with 935. But obviously this happening after Worlds, this is judged against Anthony McNaughton's 975.5 world record, no longer Anatoly's old world record going into Worlds. So that's why that is actually only 96.1%. Wahyu Surya at Asians totaled above 95% in the 59s. And then finally Taras Melnichuk and Nicholas Perot both in the 120s at World Games, just squeaking past that 95% mark. Cool. Now again, based on what we've learned from previous years, and especially the last year, if you're getting a wildcard from a international meet that is not Worlds, more than likely you're going to have to be breaking the world record there, right? Or totaling a very high percentage. I.e., if you're not breaking the world record and you're just totaling a high percentage above 95% of the world record, it's much easier to get a wildcard spot based off your Worlds performance than it is another international performance, based on what we've seen in the past, right? That's nothing official that SBD or anything have come out and said. That's just me looking at trends. So yeah, keep that in mind with that list. If you look at a similar list for the women, there's only 3 women. I'm hoping I haven't missed any here. Please correct me if I have. There's a chance I have missed stuff. I sometimes do, as a lot of you always point out my mistakes, which I like, right? Keeping accountable. But yeah, there have been 3 women who have totaled 95% or more at the internationals since Worlds. Megan Lee Smith, who broke the world record at World Games in the 52s. Sonita Muluh, who had a bigger total than she did at Worlds, even though she actually out-totaled Brittany, but still lost at World Games. And then Plune Deckers also in the 52s. So yeah, a much shorter list for the women than we saw for the men. Okay, cool. So if we combine those earlier 2 lists we saw for the men, and we take the highest percentage of the world record from Worlds, who are in the black font, and the highest percentage of the world record from the other internationals we've had since Worlds in the red font, that is the list we end up with. So Russ is at number 1 as the only lifter above the world record who has not already been invited to Sheffield. And honestly, Russ seems like a no-brainer to invite, right? If you're putting money on someone to get a wild card, I would put it on Russ for sure. Joseph McDonald and Goka are 2 and 3. Then you have Gustav and Cayco, who were 1 and 2 from Worlds, right? But if you combine it, they're actually lower than those other 3 lifters. Taylor Atwood from NAPFs, and everyone else below him was also from Worlds. So Nonso, Big Dev, Ade, and Regan. So yeah, that's what you have from your combined percentage list. And based on this list, I'm going to be putting forth my 5 contenders for who I think is most likely to receive a wildcard for Sheffield coming up from the men. I'll do the same thing for the women a bit later. And the first one, this is also going to be who I think deserves it, right? So they may not be the most realistic choices. And I say that because the first lift I'm going to look at is Rondel Hunte. I know what you're saying. How is Rondel going to get a Sheffield invite? He hasn't competed internationally, yada yada. I don't care. I do not care. Rondel needs to be at Sheffield, right? He quote unquote won PA Nats. I know he was competing as a guest lifter, but he out-totaled everyone by heaps. 10:10, which is way above the world record. He has the 120 overall world record, so the biggest 120 total ever done. 10:45 is 106.8% of the world record. That is a ridiculous amount that he is above the IPF world record by, and he's been robbed of competing for years. He's finally not banned by the IPF anymore. His ban has been lifted. It's just unfortunately his ban wasn't lifted in time for him to compete at his nationals and hence be able to go to Worlds this year. Hopefully next year should be all good. But yeah, those are my reasons for Rondel. And again, I know you are going to be saying this isn't realistic. What about the rules? Rules, come on. Powerlifting is a hobby niche sport. It's not even a professional sport. We can afford to bend the rules in cases that are as extraordinary as that of Rondel Hunte, okay? I'm sick of people just, clinging on to the rules. We can do whatever, well, we should, to some extent, be able to bend rules in scenarios like this, I believe. And I can already imagine the arguments against this. Oh, what about the precedent? You're setting a dangerous precedent. Okay, first of all, what exactly is the precedent that we're setting here? What, that if you're a lifter who has wrongfully been banned from competing internationally for years, and you also happen to be literally the best lifter in the world, totaling 70 kilos above the world record, the precedent we're setting is if that's the case, you get a pity invite to Sheffield? Well, guess what? When is that precedent going to be set ever? That's only applicable to someone like Rondel Hunte. This has never happened to anyone in the history of the sport, and I hope it doesn't happen again to anyone in the history of the sport, right? It's not like someone's going to be able to, someone's going to go to a local meet and post up a number bigger than the world record and say, oh, I want a Sheffield invite because Rondel got one. It's like, no, you're not in the same scenario as Rondel because no one is. No one's unfortunate enough to be in that scenario. So I don't think we're setting a precedent that is going to blow up in our faces with every lifter competing locally trying to get a Sheffield invite, because it's not the same scenario. And my second counterpoint is, if that is the precedent we're setting, then I'm okay with that precedent, right? I don't know why it wouldn't be. If we're ever in a scenario where arguably the greatest talent in the sport is wrongfully banned and smashing world records, not internationally because you can't compete internationally, I'm okay with the precedent being set of them getting a pity invite to Sheffield, right? So there's no, in my mind, there's no reason for this not to happen. I think he should get it. Do I think he will? Probably not, because, all that bureaucracy in the background. I think he should, but I don't think he will. Okay, moving on. My rant is over. Moving on to more realistic candidates. And like I mentioned, Russ is without a doubt the favorite here. So obviously he broke the 93 kilo IPF world record, 9:18, beating Emil Krastev's world record that was set at Sheffield this year. And he has the highest percentage of the world record on that list. So pretty much a no-brainer. I don't see any scenario in which Russ is not invited to Sheffield. He's super popular. He gets eyes on the sport, eyes on the event. There'll be tons of hype around him there. It's a win-win for everybody involved. I think he's without a doubt getting one of the two spots. Then Joseph McDonald is my other contender. He is second on the list in terms of he's totaled the second highest percentage off the world record at internationals, including worlds, of anyone not already invited. He won junior worlds with his 965 total. And on top of that, he also competed at open worlds. And while he totaled less, he still totaled above 95% at open worlds. It was like 96 point something because he totaled 945. And he did come pretty close to winning open worlds as well. Obviously, that last deadlift attempt wasn't the smartest selection, but got away from there. But he made up for it with junior worlds with a phenomenal victory, 965, beating out the favorite Joshua Ngoka. So I think he's definitely a shout. I know there was talks of Joshua Ngoka being the guy they give the wildcard to, and the fact that Joseph McDonald actually beat him, I think he should be in the conversation. And I don't think there's any way now that they're going to invite Joshua Ngoka, given that Joseph McDonald beat him head-to-head at Junior Worlds. Plus, he also has the fact that he competed at Worlds and totaled over 95% there as well at Open Worlds. So, yeah, I think if they do invite another 120, aside from Rondel, it would be Joseph McDonald, I would think, not Joshua Ngoka or Nonso either at this point. And then my other contender is Gustav Hedlund. So he came second at Worlds this year, 897.5. And if you're looking at him on that list, he was the fourth highest percentage of the world record behind Russ, Joseph McDonald, and Joshua Ngoka. But he has the highest percentage of the world record totaled from Open Worlds. And if you remember what I said earlier about how they chose last year's wildcards, they essentially took the highest percentage from Worlds and disregarded the other performances from the international since. If they do the same thing this year, then Gustav is going to be the guy to get it. He's also a former Sheffield champion, right? And also podiumed at Sheffield this year. So it's not like he wouldn't be deserving. One thing that I don't think necessarily helps Gustav's chances here, even though he did come second at Worlds, is that he had a World Games performance that wasn't exactly the best by his lofty standards, right? He totaled, I forget what the exact number was, but it was definitely less than 897.5. And yeah, the talk going in was, will he take Ross's world record? and he wasn't really particularly close. Obviously, I think it was a glute injury, if I recall correctly from his coach saying, so far from ideal there. Kind of hurts his chances because they can still give it to him on account of his Worlds performance, right? It's just that, if we look back to his most recent performance, which was a slightly disappointing World Games outing, where he lost to Anatoly, then kind of feels like a bit, if he had done better at World Games, that definitely would have strengthened his chances of getting it. But the final, or the fifth contender that I think has a realistic chance of getting it, and who also deserves to get it, in my opinion, is Jonathan Cayco, who, even though he did finish below Gustav at Worlds, he finished in third. He's fifth highest on that percentage of the world record list, behind obviously Gustav, the two 120s at Junior Worlds, and Russ. But he is second if you just take the Worlds performances, behind only Gustav. One thing that helps him though, you might be thinking, why would they take Cayco over Gustav? Gustav beat him at Worlds. Well, Cayco is the 93 kilo overall world record holder with 919.5, right? What that means is, just like Rondel being the 120 overall world record holder, the biggest performance ever done in the weight class, biggest total ever in the weight class under raw tested conditions, was done by Jonathan Cayco. 919.5 that he did to win PA Nats is still the biggest 93 total we've ever seen, and unofficially above the world record. Unofficially because he wasn't international, but still, he does have the biggest 93 total still. So I think that helps him when he comes to Sheffield, because obviously Sheffield being all about breaking world records, who better to have than the guy who has objectively totaled more than anyone ever has in the history of that weight class, right? The other thing I will say about this is, there was a bit of a precedent set last year where they invited Panna over Jonathan Garcia, even though Jonathan Garcia beat Panna at Worlds. Similar sort of situation. It wasn't for a wildcard spot. I think it was for a reserve spot, because I forget who it was that pulled out. I think it was Tim Monagatti that pulled out. But it was the reserve spot. Panna was the first reserve. Jonathan Garcia was the second reserve. Even though Jonathan Garcia finished second and beat Panna, who finished third at Worlds, they took Panna instead. So there has been kind of a precedent set there that, even though someone did lose to someone else at Worlds, they're still able to take the guy who finished lower, right? And yeah, the fact that Gustav had a slightly weaker showing at World Games since, as his most recent performance, and Cayco, even though he hasn't competed since Worlds, he still has the biggest 93 total ever. I almost think it's more likely they do take Cayco over Gustav, right? So out of those five, if I'm going by who I think deserves it the most, without a doubt, Rondel and Russ. Easy decision, don't even have to think about it, right? If I'm going based off of who I think they're realistically going to take, I think it's Russ, and I think it's between Gustav and Cayco, to be honest. And I'm thinking they take Cayco. I'm thinking Cayco v Russ is going to be a huge showdown, and the fact that Cayco is the strongest 93 ever by the numbers, even though Gustav beat him at Worlds, and Cayco, Gustav is a former Sheffield champion. Cayco's finished second at both of the two Sheffields he's been at, so he's also pretty credentialed when it comes to Sheffield. And just the Russ versus Cayco showdown would be absolutely insane. I had it in one of my previous videos looking at the most hyped showdowns we're likely to see in the next year. So this could just be me doing wishful thinking. But yeah, I think Russ and Cayco are probably the two most likely here to get it. Okay, on to the women. Same thing, combining the percentage of the world record based off of the other internationals since Worlds in red, and just based off of Worlds in black text there. So Megan Lee Smith is on top of the list, and even if you just took the Worlds percentages and not the other internationals, Megan Lee Smith would still be on top of the list, because she totaled very close to the world record at Worlds this year when she narrowly lost to Evie Corrigan. And then of course she got her revenge against Evie when she broke the world record at World Games. So Megan Lee Smith on top, Sonita Muluh from her World Games performance second, and then you have Meg Scanlon, and I'm not going to read through the rest, you've already sort of seen it. But that's how it shakes up. And so the contenders for the women's wildcards, I think it's pretty clear that the top three as the obvious three here. Megan Lee Smith, who did not get like a are fighting for a wildcard post by Sheffield for whatever reason. But I think she's the most deserving woman by far. Not only has she totaled the highest percentage of the world record at Worlds by a non-Sheffield qualified athlete, she also totaled the highest percentage of the world record by breaking the world record at World Games, where she actually finished second behind Tiff, although she beat Evie, so it kind of felt like it was a win more so than a second place. But yeah, I think if you're going by who deserves it, there's pretty much no argument against Megan Lee Smith. I just don't know, due to the politics / sponsorship / whatever else they go by, if they invite her or not. But I think she definitely deserves it. Then my second one is Sonita Muluh, who finished second at World Games behind Brittany with 7:27.5, and also finished second at Worlds behind Brittany. And she has the second highest percentage of the world record on that list, behind only Megan Lee Smith. And again, what's going for Sonita here is she did have a pretty successful Sheffield this year. She finished in, I believe it was second behind Carlina and Agatha, right, at Sheffield this year. And she was the strongest woman ever until Brittany took that title from her at Worlds to break the world record. But it's always super exciting to have Brittany v Sonita. It's been one of the best rivalries we've seen in powerlifting, especially on the women's side. It's been the best rivalry on the women's side we've seen in the last few years, I think, hands down. They've gone back and forth between each other for the last couple of Worlds and the last couple of Sheffields, and Brittany has 2 wins in a row now against her at Worlds and World Games this year, after Sonita beat her at Sheffield this year. Although the last one at World Games almost kind of doesn't feel like a win for Brittany, because Sonita still out-totaled her. It was just the fact it was done on gel points. So you could almost say they're tied, because Sonita beat her at Sheffield, Brittany beat her at at Worlds, and at World Games, even though on paper Brittany won, Sonita still out-totaled her. So you could kind of say they've been level this year and even. So it would be a cool decider to get them to go head-to-head yet again at Sheffield. And it's always exciting when you have the strongest women in the world, literally the strongest women ever, competing in a head-to-head battle against each other. It's always great to see. So I think Sonita has a pretty good chance here. And the third woman I think who is in with a shot is Meg Scanlon. So she finished third at Worlds in the 63s. Both of the 63s who finished above her, Alba and Chiara Bernardi, already both have Sheffield invites, so they'll both be there. So a rematch between that podium would be pretty epic, because it was quite a cool battle. So yeah, third highest percentage of the world record, behind, of course, Megan Lee Smith and Sonita. And another thing she has going for her, similar to Cayco, is she holds the 63 kilo overall world record with 566. So she has posted up the biggest 63 kilo total we've ever seen from a raw tested woman, which is 1 kilo above what Alba did to set the IPF world record at Worlds this year. And I believe Alba also totaled 565 at World Games again. So Meg Scanlon still has the biggest 63 total ever. And yeah, just like Cayco, that should help her in her bid to get that wildcard spot. So those are the 3 most realistic options, I think, for the women. Who do I think will get it? Who do I think deserves it? Probably leaning towards the top 2 there, Megan Lee Smith and Sonita. I'm picking Sonita over Meg Scanlon purely because Sonita, she did total a bigger percentage of the world record, and she did kind of sort of felt like she beat Brittany Schlater at World Games because she out-totaled her. So yeah, I think that's... And it's also just cool to have a super heavyweights go head-to-head, where in the 63s, as cool as it would be to have Meg Scanlon there, we already have Chiara versus Alba. That's going to happen, right? But in terms of who I think will get it, it honestly could be any combination. It might even just be Sonita and Meg Scanlon, to be honest. Just because, like I said, there has been a fighting for a wildcard post made about Megan Lee Smith, despite how well she did at both Worlds and World Games. But there you go. There's my breakdown of the Sheffield Wildcards and who's going to get the spots for both the men and the women. Let me know what you think. Who do you think is most deserving, and who would you most like to see at Sheffield next year?